you're going to find that a big part of my presentation today is going to be expression in gratitude, because what I have the opportunity to share with you is very much a team effort, and we'll bring to light the team that brings this data to you this afternoon. I want to be sure and thank Dr. Peter Davies and the Leman Program Committee for including this very unusual but hopefully enthusiastic work for this group this afternoon. There is a very large amount of collaboration that took place, industry working with Iowa State. It's been a phenomenal accomplishment. Dr. Anna Johnson at Iowa State deserves probably the greatest lion's share for the development of the model and the work that we conducted, and Shauna Weimer now is a graduate student at the University of Arkansas in the Department of Poultry Science. She's continuing to pursue her interest in animal well-being, now focused more in the poultry area. So we've got four major objectives here. We're going to kind of begin to share with you the background to this human-pig relationship. It's going to be a little bit of my opportunity to express to you the learning curve a veterinarian has to follow before he can understand the terms associated with ethology, Dr. Brown. But we did travel that, and an old veterinarian can learn new terms. If not new tricks, we can at least learn new terms. How to measure that relationship, some of the comparisons that we've done. And I'm going to use the term validation quite frequently because of the efforts and the model that we created to validate this human-animal interaction in a social population. Many of you are familiar with Dr. Anna Johnson's work in the area of the swine welfare assurance program. 2003, when she developed that swap, I worked with her very closely in a committee level to understand how that measurement could be done in a population, extending your hand and looking at a time to approach the observer. It was included as the swap. There's a piece of it now in the National Pork Board's 2007 National Pork Quality Assurance Program. But a behavior measure within an on-farm welfare assessment must be objective, repeatable, reliable, and fast. So my contribution to this project was to look at Anna Johnson's swap concept, take it into a population. I'm going to use the term response variable kind of loosely for the statisticians in the group, and then take that in a very rapid, quick assessment within barn variable to measure responses different for the animal behavior that we're measuring. So as you look at customers, you and I being a customer, my wife being a customer of what we do, the consuming public, they want to know that what we do at the farm is very animal friendly. I think we saw part of that recognized in what Jeremy Pittman received the Science in Practice Award. I heard it mentioned several times that he's applied science in the area of animal health and in the area of animal well-being. So we are very dedicated as a profession, as a team, as an industry to understand how we can bring that science, and we want to keep the emphasis on the science, to our animal well-being assessments. So if you look at kind of the resource-based measures, I think these are the areas that I'd probably be most comfortable in. But as we look at kind of that animal response, we've got some of the numbers that we like to share and commonly discuss, body conditions, but then this little variable of behavior keeps popping up as an animal-based measure. There are different types of stresses and behavior. So the stress, and I don't know what that is, but if you'll just work with me in terms here, can sometimes be linked to this fight or flight or freeze based on an animal's kind of fear response. And as we thought about measuring and putting this into a practical application, we wanted to avoid anything associated with stress. So we went into this area of motivation, okay? And there is not intended to be any comparison of the way an animal thinks and a human thinks. I don't understand that, so I'm not going to relate to that. But we can begin to observe behaviors that attract an animal or an aversive stimuli where an animal may tend to avoid either a person or some kind of environmental stimuli. So we chose to look at this approach alternative. We looked at a variable that's going to include the term approach, and we're going to develop the concept of how that came about. The literature is going to suggest that there are scientifically proven ways to measure this motivation kind of factor. Probably the novel approach being most scientifically repeatable and acceptable, but certainly not practical at the farm level. The social isolation of a pig gives you a certain understanding of behavior of the pig, but again is not practical in environments that you and I work. And so we brought to bear a whole new concept. That's WTA. We're going to take an animal surveillance, an animal behavior indicator, and apply it now to a population. It's new, somewhat novel, and very challenged, obviously, as we began the process. So I'm going to take a little bit of time in this slide to help you understand that we have a wonderful publication, our Journal of Swine Health and Production. How many of you are familiar with that particular scientific publication? Those of you that are veterinarians probably review it regularly. So let me share with you just briefly and compliment the group there. Terry O'Sullivan, Judy Bell, Kate Dewey, Karen Richardson, Tina Smith. You may or may not know those names. They took a chance with us. So back in 2010 and actually beginning in 2008, we did studies that began to utilize this social variable to assess changes within population, and we called it willing to approach. So therefore, the acronym WTA, we cannot live in this industry without creating more and more acronyms, but willing TA is this willingness of the pig to approach an observer. It's not intended to imply that I know what the pig's thinking or what his willingness or she's willing to do, but the posture, behavior, the change in her stance suggests that she's willing to comfortably make contact with the human observer. Now, as we think about all the variables that can interact and affect an animal's interest in a new stimuli within the environment, there are several scientists much more advanced in their thinking than I, but particularly Dr. Paul Hemsworth and Barnett from Australia, Dr. Moore, some of these others that have done work in group size of animal, sex of animal, age of animal, caretaker interactions. I heard you mention that, Chris, that the caretaker and that consistency of the caretaker is extremely important. So these variables are all taken into consideration in the data I'm going to share with you. So do not be thinking about this application in a between barn environment. Everything I'm going to share with you has to be done within the barn to account for gender differences and stabilities and everything that exists. We know there are some very immediate limitations to the information I'm going to share with you. So this publication in Journal of Swine Health and Production of 2014 is the published data associated with the validation work that the Journal of Swine Health and Production gave us an opportunity, actually a requirement, that if we were going to publish in a prior concept, then it was going to be on our shoulders to come back through with a model to validate the observation procedures that we conducted. And now up to this point in time, you're sitting here wondering, what the heck is he talking about? We haven't got through all the examples. But if you'll hang with me as I start going through the data, I'll build the concept on how this response variable works. So we published on the human interaction and ability to measure it. To validate it, we had to bring a camera into the environment in order to justify the observations that the human was able to see. I want to give Locke Carricker full credit for his contributions. I don't know if many of you may know Dr. Carricker. Many of you may not know, but one of his hobbies and passions is photography. So we got him involved and helped us design this monopod that we could take a camera in, put it behind the observer, do the observations that we will describe here in just a moment, take a picture of that, and then look at utilizing sophisticated software components to analyze the picture and help us build an ethogram before we were done. So the first commercial nursery application took place in March of 2011. 40 pens, 22 pigs per pen, about 0.3 meters of pig space. And the concept I want to build very quickly is because there's differences in the replication here. In this first application, Shauna was in that environment by herself. She did the animal assessments as well as the photography. And in the second replication, there will be a difference as there were two individuals. Shauna did the animal observations, and then I actually took the picture. So there's going to be a little bit of an impact in the data I'm going to share. So the design, basically, we Went into the nursery pens, did a complete randomization of which pens fell into the treatments. We had a live human observation, we had digital animal evaluation. And then because of this digital opportunity, we had an opportunity to apply the software and measure snout to tail base differences from the observer's hands. We could apply a lot more mathematical models into that validation effort. So in order to make this consistent, you have to understand that we're comfortably, calmly entering a pen. You do it farthest away from the door. We begin to work our way through the barn, entering each pen in a consistent fashion. Then according to Dr. Hemsworth, we get into a crouching position with a glove on each hand. We extend that arm to the pigs. We made an executive decision to hold the time consistent to the original swap definition of 15 seconds, waiting for an amount of pigs to approach the observer in that crouched position, and then measure the amount of pigs in that approach type behavior. And in this example, you'll begin to see that there is a change in the behavior. There are a certain number and population of the pigs that immediately approach the new stimulus within the environment. And behind Shauna is this camera so that she can take a picture of that behavior consistent with what she's observing at her hand. So, for the sake of time, we will recognize that the camera allows us to do a whole lot more work and description of that animal behavior. We can have a touch concept. You can see where the pigs are actually touching, in this case, Shauna, her body or her hand. We've got this idea of orientate. So as you look at that picture, you can see which pigs are looking at Shauna. So we begin to look at lots of different analytical methods. Obviously, when we start looking at the observer component of that, we're only counting these pigs and looking for those that we can definitely see their face and know they're engaging us as the observer. So the ability to create the ethogram does not exist for the individual observer, but is immediately apparent when we start including the camera as part of that evaluation. This is the animal scientist, again, teaching the veterinarian, Jennifer, that we've got an understanding of what the pig is doing. And then since we've got these photographs, we've got this idea of analyzing what the pig is not doing. So we've got this not ethogram. So pigs that were not interested in us and the stimuli within the pen, they could be standing away, piling, they could sit, they could lie, they could put the head in the feeder, mouth around the drinker. All that was taken into consideration as we look at the validation with the camera. The analytical methods then allowed us to look at this interface between snout and the hand and the tail and the hand. So we've got a kind of an anatomical location and orientation of the pig towards the observer. And again, with the camera's help, we've got this idea of the pig is facing away from the observer. I'm not going to go into great detail in the next slide, but we can look at the live observation, the ability to detect pigs facing the observer versus away, and the inches associated with that were allowed to be analyzed. So there is a little bit of a different ability to assess the orientation of that pig in the live versus the digital observations and procedures. Again, that not pig posture, consistent with the ethogram that we described in the photographs we were able to take. We can understand those pigs that are not approaching, the percent of those that are basically on a total population basis, that are standing, sitting, lying, very low percentage that are piling, and then the head in the feeder or the mouth around the drinker. So the camera allows us to do an extremely wonderful assessment of that barn, of that pen, of that population, document it, measure it, statistically analyze it. So the anatomical locations, again, the touch and the orient and the knot, kind of the snout versus the tail base. There's some differences between how that pig is orientating itself within the pen to the observer also within that pen. So the take-home message from that first study is that the digital image allows for more animal-human interaction measurements, as I think you could clearly see from the data that we could share at this point. Postures and behaviors of the pigs classified as not oriented should be further described in order to avoid any concluding that pigs not classified in the touch-oriented categories are fearful. And again, Chris, I think you saw in your environment, you see people interact. These pigs were very well managed. Obviously, there was a frequent human pig interaction and contact with the caretaker that owned this barn, so these pigs were very comfortable with that people interaction. Fear response was really not expected in these pigs. All right, so the next data set I'm going to share with you very quickly is a little bit more development in the concept of how this observation takes place. So the second replicate was similar in design, except different in its application because we had two people. We had Shauna get in the pen, and then I stood behind her with a camera so that she didn't have to manipulate so many tools and movements between pens. Again, the same monogram is included. This is the pen design of the barn that we were in. We did this over a 2-day period of time in November of 2011. The 4 nursery rooms, 40 pens per pen, 19 pigs, same amount of square pace, approximately 1/3 of a meter. And again, the observer is blinded to any kind of treatments. And in this case, the application that we see is the differentiation of vaccine responses in pigs. So the treatment did include a comparison of vaccination products. We did have a control group, the Circoflex Micaflex and the Circumet PCV2M. These pigs were 5 weeks old, 2 weeks post-placement into the nursery environment. And that becomes a critical consideration when we look at evaluating these populations, is there is a socialization required after pigs are placed. We've tried to do this like immediately after the population is established and there's too much socialization occurring to begin to get the effect. But 2 weeks after placement, we began to identify our opportunity for this evaluation. Now hang with me in concept because the variable includes the same population of pigs becoming their own baseline before any manipulation occurs, and then the evaluation is done so that the post-treatment evaluation occurs as close to 24 hours after the baseline assessment. So again, given all the scientific data that I suggested and all the variables that Hemsworth and Barnett and others have cited, we want to do this in the same barn, the same population of pigs, the same conditions that we can find over a 24-hour period of time. So a pre-change position is evaluated. People go into the population, they assess that animal behavior, and then an immunization procedure takes place. And then 6 hours after the pigs are vaccinated, consistent with 24 hours after the baseline observation, a comparison is made in the number of animals that approach that observer. And we did that with both the animals in the pen as well as with the camera. So we did the same type of thing, same type of crouching position. Again, what I've tried to describe is there was a second person involved with the placement of the camera behind the observer so that we could kind of minimize the disturbance and noise associated with movements. And in this particular case, the number of pigs that were either touch-oriented or not in a pre-vaccination environment compared to the live and the digital observations that we're able to obtain did not statistically differ. And the same effect and observation was observed in the post-vaccination population. Now, the data I'm sharing with you today is only consistent with the validation efforts that we underwent to demonstrate the consistency of the observations. In the absence of the camera, a single person can move through a population, make the assessments, calculate the percentage that basically demonstrate an interaction, and then do an intervention and understand how that intervention may have altered that population approach. So the take-home message from the second study is that there was no difference between the live human and the digital image between the pigs in the touch or not categories. And this, again, is probably due to the change in the way that we had two people, one interacting with the pigs, the second moving the camera to capture that digital picture. We do plan to release the data associated with the changes in the animal behavior observed But again, consistent with the requirement of the Journal of Swine Health and Production and the validation required, this is the first publication that we put forth into the literature.